in some selected African countries. We've taken the hint, and we'll try to do such because case studies will involve 5 African countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, South Africa, and Mozambique. What we'll be trying to do in our discussion is to find what the intersections are, where there are differences in these countries in terms of meeting milestones that are set in terms of service delivery, and then trying to find out where we can mitigate the gaps that have been created in terms of policy frameworks and service deliveries. We have tried in our assessment to start up with using first principles thinking. And because we're using first principles thinking as the basis for some of the methodologies that we have used in this study, what we have done is also to try to avoid assumptions by breaking down the fundamental truths of the discussion. Now, in doing this, part of the problem that we have seen is that we are forced to create hypotheses. And the 3 major hypotheses are related to corruption, capacity gaps, especially in the civil service in African countries, and thirdly, the over-centralization of power in the center. Now, this is founded on the basis that each of these 5 African countries that we have, there are also differences in terms of the trajectory over time. I'm sorry, I'm trying to slow down to see if we can get the slides on the screen. It's essentially a doctrinal study with the primary use of primary materials such as reports, statistical data, some of them from government, host government agencies of the areas of study. For example, we have statistical data from the National Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria, from the Ghanaian Statistical. Just as a little joke though, I was discussing with my wife this morning, I mentioned that all the witches and wizards in my village are probably on their way to Gambia to see me make an embarrassment of myself. But I know I have a very forgiving audience. Now, one of the reasons this study can be controversial, especially in terms of our perception of Africa, its leadership, and what our futures hold for us, is because a lot of the data are drawn from institutions and agencies that are not very forgiving of African perspectives, African perceptions, and African viewpoints, and the nuances under which we live as Africans. However, we have tried to have a very morally neutral rendering of the data that has been supplied. We have used agencies across several fronts, such as Transparency International, the World Bank, the IMF. We have also used some agencies that are, like I said, that are host statistical agencies, and we have used the writings of writers and their perception and opinions on the data that they have also supplied. And this has gone over time from right before the permutations and historical evolution, before independence, during independence, and currently as we stand. Some of the commonalities that you see across some of the subject areas will be, like we said, over centralization of power, weak capacities, and all that. Now, for the 5 countries that we have chosen, we have avoided choosing countries in North Africa as one of the countries of study for several reasons. Number one, because we did not, we couldn't envisage what the cultural differences will lead us to with respect to our findings. Africans have a much more traditional setting and faith belief systems as against North African countries who have more linkages to the Middle East and Euro-Asian values. And because of that, we had thought that a more sub-Saharan African experience will have better lessons in which all the subject countries and the rest of Africa can draw from. Screen now. Okay. Thank you very much. Can I start now? Okay. And my apologies for the delay. My witches and wizards were working overtime. So the title of our topic is Interrogating Good Governance, Public Policy, Administration, and Service Delivery in Africa. Next slide, please. And the content of the paper, I think I have 35 minutes, with which I've already beaten into a lot. So we are going to try to keep it fast and keep it moving. We have the introduction, objectives of the study, methodology, the 5 countries, conceptual frameworks, general governance, public policy, administration, service delivery, where we did a cross-country analysis. Then good governance in Africa was treated separately as a subtopic under the field. Public policy in Africa, public administration in Africa, service delivery, whether we can, as Africans, have a blueprint for governance and service delivery. And we concluded with some recommendations. Next. Next slide. So, Africa's delivery challenges have been ongoing for a while, like we said, since independence. If you look at a country like Zimbabwe, which had independence in 1980 and was supposedly very strong administratively and economically, And then you look at Zimbabwe 30 years, 40 years down the line, where it's at today, and then you realize that against the background of the research that we have done, we have found out that there are three basic things that point to, that are background information to the present state of affairs. And the first one is relating to state legitimacy. The second one is the institutional design. And thirdly, the distribution of power. One of the speakers yesterday said Africa was entrusted upon Africans because we didn't sit down to make decisions as to our union. Those decisions were made for us, and because of that, that came intrinsic, it came with some problems. The specific objectives of the presentation are: number one, to examine the nature of public policy formulation in the 5 selected African countries, evaluate the effectiveness of service delivery in key sectors such as health, education, and infrastructure, identify the countries of study, and also draw lessons from our comparisons. Next slide. Now, I told you that we're using partly first principles thinking, and because of that, we try to avoid assumptions. And in avoiding assumptions, one of the counter things that you avoid will be having any kind of hypothesis. But in this particular event, we had no option but to go back to hypothesizing. And in hypothesizing, we looked at, number one, weak implementation capacity for a country like Gambia, for example, where the civil service is starved of professional staff, and there's a deficit in terms of capacity. No offense meant. Then secondly, entrenched corruption and patronage networks all across Africa, not just the 5 areas of study. And next slide. The methodology, like I said earlier, employs the critical interpretive approach where we read policies, reforms, and laws, and also statistical data from varied organizations and fields. And secondarily, we also focused on the writings of scholars, particularly African scholars. Next slide. The paper is built largely on 4 concepts, which we used as working definitions for what we call good governance and a definition of public policy, public administration, and service delivery. And governance, we said, we conceptualize as a process that prioritizes the rule of law, accountability, transparency, and inclusivity to address government deficits such as high governance costs, weak institutions, maladministration, and poor service delivery, among others. For public policy, we looked at the deliberateness of decisions and strategies and actions of African governments. And public administration, we said it should be we should look at the institutional and bureaucratic structures, processes, and practices through which public policy goals are translated into outcomes. So public administration, basically, we used as the implementation process for policies. Service delivery, we defined as the extent to which a country can translate policy and administrative capacity into the effective and equitable provision of essential public goods and services to the citizens. So, service delivery must be directly related to public policy. And in the middle, the processes are basically taken care of by our understanding about administration. Next slide, please. Now, for the 5 countries, Nigeria being one of the countries exemplified the challenge of reforming a large, resource-rich, deeply fragmented democracy. I remember coming in and the man at the hotel, myself and someone else, we were grumbling about how difficult it was to live in Nigeria nowadays because of rising costs. And the man at the hotel who was helping us with the bag said, "Please, sir, that is the last thing I want to hear, because when we see Nigerians, we are always happy because Nigerians spend money." And I was left wondering where that money was coming from. I don't think it's from my country. So because of, obviously, Nigeria is seen as a resource-rich country that has a very large population, and yet fragmented bureaucracy, especially in terms of its federating units. We thought that was an important aspect to use as part of the study. Then we look at Gambia, which reflects the vulnerabilities of small states, which against the part of the problem that small states have is the vulnerability to autocracy. And then when they transmit from autocracy to democracies, the difficulties therein. Then Ghana offers insights into the consistency of reform, where even though there have been many peaceful changes from government to government under a democratic setting, you still have consistency in policies. South Africa, right from the Grootboom case where economic and social rights were ingrained in the lexicon as being justiciable. South Africa that entrenches fundamental human rights, freedom of speeches, despite the spatial and racial inequalities in the country. And Zimbabwe, we said, represents a case of institutional erosion under authoritarian rule and economic collapse, basically because of the hyperinflation and insecurities that afflicted the country, especially coming off the back foot of its land redistribution policies. Next line. Now, the Nigerian, I think, let's keep this and just go to the next one. There have been several programs in Nigeria, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which try to diversify from oil into things like agriculture, power, industrialization, and all that. We've also had the Orosanye report and the Udoji Commission, which did civil service reforms, tried to streamline civil service where there will not be too much overlapping of functions. You had the National Health Insurance Scheme, which has been there since 2005, that has tried to expand health coverage across the country. And most public workers are registered under the National Health Insurance Scheme. I have tried to register twice in my 20-something years of working for the University of Ilorin. I still pay for my own health payment because those two attempts at registration did not materialize and there was no completion. Then we have digital initiatives, integrated payroll and personal information system, which we call the IPPIS, which Nigerian unions, particularly the Association of the Academic Staff Union of Universities, went on strike for 8 months. And then you have the Treasury single accounts, which were also digital systems that were made to try to centralize the reception and payment of money into and out of public institutions. Then you have the gift meets. And then there's also the national identity number. There are anti-corruption efforts in Nigeria, which is also a policy that brought into the fourth agencies such as the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the ICPC, Code of Conduct Bureau, internal audit, another internal auditing things. There's the Public Procurement Act and other processes. Then you have another program, which is the Universal Basic Education, that offered free compulsory education to children at a certain level. Then we've had national development plans since 1962, which were focused on industrialization and improving infrastructure. Next slide. Now, some of the challenges that we found were poor continuity between governments, again over centralization, weak institutional enforcement, resistance to reforms. And one of the problems I think we've had, especially in terms of challenges, is people getting government trust. And I'll give you an example. Some years back, we had a president who was supposedly interested in a third-year term, had a senator who was pursuing the third-year term at the National Assembly. Now, there were news in the newspapers that this particular senator had collected, I think, at the time, maybe 100 million or 200 million, I can't quite remember. And the senator caused to be published by his group of accountants in the United Kingdom that he had too much money to be collecting the kind of pittance for the third term agenda, right? And the Nigerian Code of Conduct down. So they put him up before the Code of Conduct Tribunal. And what followed was that the Attorney General of the Federal Republic of Nigeria entered what we call a noli prosequi, which is we are not interested in the case. And the case was withdrawn from the Code of Conduct Tribunal. So because of that, for governments to have what you call institutional legitimacy and trust, they must act in a way that is congruent with the public policy that they set out. Entrenched corruption and politicized agencies are also part of the challenges. Policy hijack by elites, diversion of funds, healthcare. Up till now, the records show that there are only 10%, we only have 10% adequate healthcare coverage for Nigerians. Education, there are dilapidated infrastructures, poor pay, and strikes. But we also have what you call the tertiary education trust fund, TED fund, that has also pumped some money into higher education institutions in Nigeria. However, there are discussions that the money could be more effectively utilized. Then for infrastructure, we have chronic power outages, corruption. Well, for power outages, we have over 200 million Nigerians that are sharing about 5,000 megawatts of electricity. Then there are cases of corruption in procurement, public distrust of digital systems, especially when the digital system was supposed to be used for elections. But what stands out in Nigeria's experience is not the lack of policies or reforms, but the chronic difficulty in translating them into good governance. Next slide. Now, the Gambian state illustrates how the dynamics of small states shape public administration and service delivery. I'm in Gambia, so you may forgive me for comparing the size of Gambia to Nigeria. There are over 200 million Nigerians. There are 2 million Gambians, or thereabouts, no offense meant. Now, what this shows is that a lot of the factors that should be an advantage to a country like Nigeria will not be an advantage to, the Gambia, for example, will not be able to point to sufficient population that can act as an adequate marketplace for products and services. It will also be difficult to have expertise, wide varying expertise across fields. However, and because of that, because of the smallness of the country, there's an accentuation of personal relationships, which can easily lead to nepotism. But again, in Nigeria, we also have 200 people, 200 million people, and nepotism has not disappeared. So, go figure. So while progress has been made in Gambia, especially coming from the long period of President Yahya Jammeh, and going into a new transition, the discussions point to the fact that there is still a long gap between the aspirations of people at transition and the common realities on the ground now. Next slide. Policies under President Yahya Jammeh centralized and often personalized things, and then one of the more popular ones, I think, across the world was about the herbal HIV cure at the time. Another one, the national development plans, governance, which related to governance, the economy, and the improvement of social services. And like most other African countries too, there was the civil service reforms which try to strengthen public service, improve nepotism, and then have more efficient financial management systems. Then there's the health sector programs too, but a lot of that have basically become donor supported. And because they are donor supported, the level at which people funnel money into any African country also puts the African country at certain vulnerabilities, such as pursuing the agenda of other nations, especially those from the global north. Of course, there were also free basic education and literary expansion, which have greatly helped the country. Next slide. Some of the challenges are authoritarianism, patronage and favoritism, a small pool of trained professionals, like we said, heavy reliance on donors, the difference between health in the rural areas and the urban areas, equipment, staff deficit and all that, and then quality issues relating to education, poor teacher training, low pay, infrastructure, political fragmentation, especially post-transition, and resistance to decentralization of power and resources. Next slide. Now, Ghana is supposed to offer something different because of the consistency in its policies despite its changing leaderships. Next slide. So it came with certain programs. There was, at some point, the Vision 2020, the Poverty Reduction Strategy 1 and 2, and then the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 1 and 2, which gave long and medium-term frameworks for development. Then there was the social services reforms, structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and 1990s, and public sector reforms. There were attempts to decentralize by powering local governments, the Local Government Act, and forming district assemblies. There was the National Health Insurance Scheme, and then the education initiatives, where there was the free and compulsory universal basic education, free senior, and the free senior high school policy. Next slide. But regardless of its seeming consistency and solidity in leadership, there are still some challenges. One being political interference, patronage, bureaucratic inefficiencies, fiscal over-centralization, and all that, as well as infrastructure, where the popular dumps or electric crisis is still happening, and uneven access to water, sanitation, and then the fear that electoral cycles will continue to make policies unsustainable, and the overarching dependence on donors and externally influenced reforms. Next slide. Now, the robustness of the South African Constitution creates, again, what we think should be a different path. From what I've been saying so far, it's as if for every road that we travel, we eventually end up in the same place. This was also supposed to be a different path. Next slide. Where there were reconstruction and development programs, growth, employment, and redistribution programs that try to focus on macroeconomic stability, national development plans, the Bato Pele, I hope I pronounce it well. I think that would be a Sitholo language interpretation for people first, which wanted to entrench transparency, accountability, and service orientation. Then the affirmative action and black economic empowerment policies, and also social grants, which was said to have extended to about 17 million citizens. Next slide. However, there were still weaknesses, especially some of the challenges, weaknesses in administrative execution of progressive policies, corruption and patronage, particularly under the Jacob Zuma regime, politicization of bureaucracy, which compromised meritocracy, service delivery protests over things like housing, water, electricity. You remember that in the Grootboom case, it was, the case was specifically centered on housing, where it was said that citizens could sue government for housing. Why? Because the Constitution, especially as it relates to the ESC rights, made it justiciable. Then education, there were also poor outcomes despite the access and then the increase in numbers. Chronic electricity crisis, persistent racial and spatial inequalities, constitutional promises that had raised expectations were in fact not met in practice. Next line. Zimbabwe offered something different. Why? Because of at one time, the complete breakdown of administrative solidity. There was also hyperinflation. There was a complete meltdown in the society where the currency went up in terms of, went down in terms of its value to a point that I think defied all economic projections. And because of that, there were three basic things that stood out. Number one, there was pervasive centralization of power. Policy formulation and implementation had also been concentrated in the executive and in the person of the president, which undermined local accountability. And then there was also erosion of institutional trust. Next line. There were programs too, redistributive policies, which we said acted as a background to the economic collapse of Zimbabwe. There were the economic structural adjustment programs, the education expansion, health initiatives, and all that. Next slide. Then because of the fusion of party and state, especially when you have a very powerful lone political organization, we found out that there was a publicization of the bureaucracy. There was hyperinflation. So all policies that were brought found it difficult to come to fruition. Again, this also happened because of the international isolation of the country. And the economic structural adjustment programs reforms even worsened unemployment and hollowed out bureaucracy. There was brain drain, health, education, centralization of powers were all challenges, corruption and patronage, and severe erosion of institutional trust, like I said. Next line. Next slide. So, from all the 5 countries that we have talked about, there are some things that are common to them. One of them being weak implementation capacity, where we have fantastic ideas and very fantastic policy frameworks and have no expertise to carry them out to fruition. Then there's corruption and patronage over centralization of decision making, poor service delivery. If I can ask one question, what will you say triumph above all these commonalities? That one thing that if it is resolved, every other thing will fall into place. Corruption. Thank you. I deliberately tried to put it out of place so that we can do a little thinking in terms of the prominence of the solutions that are at our behest. Next line. However, there were also some differences, and one of the differences was that there were policy inconsistency. Ghana's policy stability and Nigeria's policy volatility. And then there was also the small and large state challenges, the Gambia's, for example, as opposed to Nigeria, where you think that there will be different paths to resolve the problem, and then you take those 2 different paths and still arrive at the same challenges. Next slide. Now, there are key dimensions in terms of African governance, and we look at it and try to highlight 4 of these. Number 1, that a blueprint will be obviously respect for diversity and pluralism, because you have multi-religious and multi-tribal engagements. The next one will be that there should be participatory democracy. And we have to underscore this by saying that, I mean, the real question is, do we really want the current type of democracy that we are practicing? In Nigeria, for example, my opinion would be that the current democracy we are practicing is not financially sustainable. Then that there should be anti-corruption initiatives which will be critical in curbing resource management, and then there should also be decentralization. In Nigeria, the federal government has started trying to channel the funding for state governments, the funding for local government directly to the local governments, which is actually in violation of the double-tier bicameral legislature system that we have in Nigeria. Why? Because the thinking is that if the funding goes down to the local government directly, there will be more grassroots participation and that can trigger economic growth. Next slide. And our priorities for public policy will basically be what it has always been. Number one, poverty alleviation and social protection, industrialization and digital transformation, climate resilience and sustainable resource management, youth empowerment and employment creation, policy effectiveness, which will depend not just on design, but on political will, institutional solidity, and citizen ownership. Next slide. And that for public administration, there should be a focus on civil service reforms, as there has always been, e-governance innovations, which will improve transparency and efficiency, which was what the IPPIS was supposed to be for in Nigeria, but obviously, I'm jumping ahead of myself. There's a conclusion I want to make that I don't think we are in the right place to make it. But obviously, we need e-governance innovations, public-private partnerships, which especially university institutions are into. There are constant engagements relating to providing hostels for students, providing healthcare for students, providing power for students at the University of Ilorin in a PPP framework. And that we must strike a balance between modern democratic models and indigenous governance traditions. Next line. Next slide. And the litmus test for whether we can achieve service delivery will be our focus on corruption and resource leakages, over centralization of authority, capacity deficits, and security challenges. Because if you look at our sub-Saharan boundary, there are continuous incursions of security threats into the sub-Saharan belt, and this is currently ongoing. In Nigeria, for example, the Northeast is a hotbed of insecurity, and there's a danger that that can spread to the rest of the country. Next line. However, innovations such as community-based health insurance in Rwanda, mobile banking in Kenya, and decentralized civil models in, decentralized service models in Ghana show that African-driven solutions can overcome systemic weaknesses. Next line. And the question is, do we, despite our suggestions, have any blueprint for African emergence in the good governance stakes? Is there something called an African philosophy? I have taught jurisprudence and legal theory for over 20 years, and we are just still coming to terms with something called an African philosophy. Is Ubuntu an African philosophy that is worthy of the emerging markets and politics that we have found ourselves in? Obviously, we must also include administrative capacity, depoliticization, especially of government, administration, and the judiciary. Entrench hybrid governance systems that moves both Western ideas of democracy and those of traditional African institutions. Citizen-driven accountability and demand for service delivery. And we must also have Pan-African collaborations, which is what we are here currently doing. I remember at the 2024 CEO Forum, the richest man in Africa Haji Aliyu Dangote said something. For him to travel across Africa in his investment bid, he has to acquire nothing less than 35 visas to do that. For a French investor will require less than 1/3 of those visas. Next slide. In 2016, I was watching the news and came upon this where the European Space Agency did something they called the Rosetta space probe. And right there, I thought it would be a beautiful day. There will be a beautiful day like this to talk about something called the Rosetta principle. Something I completely coined myself. And the reason this is important for our discussion is the Rosetta probe was funded by the European Space Agency with the involvement of about 23 different countries. 23 different European nations, as well as the European Union itself as an organization. And before the probe was launched in 2004, there had been at least 2 decades of preparation, of which all those states kept funding it without any realizable idea of whether it would be successful or not. And they did that for over 20 years. Eventually, in 2016, when eventually the probe landed, now the idea was to put some kind of data gathering device on a meteor that was in space and flying at thousands of kilometers per hour. And eventually, when they did that in 2016, many of the people that were working there had not even been born when that space probe eventually landed on that meteor in 2016. So it tells me that for one to be successful, there has to be a design, some kind of vision, there has to be precision, and there has to be consistency. Imagine Africa having what we can call maybe a Rosetta principle. Next slide.
Prof, I think you should come here.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, and is really covering a wide range of countries and their associated challenges. But I wanted to ask one particular question around the fusion of state and party, particularly the liberation movement. That seemed to be a trend. We have seen attempts to reform the civil service, but I don't see any success.
You talked about the African philosophy. Omoluabi is a good person. So if we ingrain into our system that principle, what it will translate to, in my view, is good governance that has appeared to elude us. You discussed what we call the Rosetta principle. For me, from the discussions, it means Rosetta principle is talking about resilience, talking about focus, talking about resourcefulness, talking about commitment. And of course, we also, it's a marathon, as it were. These are not absent from an average African person. What I believe is absent is the need for people at the top to harmonize and synergize all this and fire our people. Again, congratulations for the deal.
Professor Koji, Emeritus Professor Koji.
Thank you very much, Mr. Presenter. I was enthralled by your presentation. But what struck me most is that is the bane of African development. A government comes.
A conscious decision as to what will greater effectuate their visions for the future. And if the vision is not existing, then you can't randomly climb up a hill. For you to climb up a hill, it has to be intentional. You need to have a vision. You are more likely to fall downhill if you don't know where you are going. And like they say, you may have the best ship in the world. Without the vision and the design, the ship can just be floating on the seas and not know where it's going. So there are basic rules for corruption. Well, there are permutations in which you can limit corruption. Currently, you can do digitization. But as the IPPIS digitization payment platform in Nigeria has shown, even within the IPPS platform, there was corruption. Where you had wastages that were incomprehensible compared to how it was even before the platform came into play. Then what principles? Do we have an African principle? I like to tell my students that we have an African principle that is ingrained in terms of our relationship with each other. And I think if you travel across the world, one of the things that will strike you when you come to Africa is the warmth of its people because of our connectedness. And one of the first things I think an African traveler outside of Africa notices is the sense of isolation and desolation of people outside of Africa. And I think it's something of, I remember, I think 2011, following a University of Ilorin team to the US for some interactions. And part of the problem was that there were a lot of people in the prison and reformative systems because of broken down marriages in the US, especially in the black projects. Because what happened basically was that with empowerment of black people also came some vulnerabilities. And there were destructions of the black family, which was, and what was happening was that there were a lot of black people entering into the penal systems. And one of the things we taught them was that if you have an African marriage system, it can reduce the marriage, it can reduce marriage dissolutions by creating a support network for married couples. When I was getting married, all my friends followed me to my in-laws for the introduction and all that. And I can remember if I were to have if I say I'm having a problem with my wife and I tell any of my friends that, you know, this woman is this, I'm thinking of divorce, one of the first things any of them will say is, look, you took me there to go and kneel down. So I don't want to hear anything about whatever the problem is, let's sit down and resolve it. Because I don't kneel down to anybody for nothing. And these are the kind of support structures that are absent in a lot of countries in the global north, but by themselves they form a big supportive structure. And we are not just saying people should stay in marriages. It is because people staying in marriages created a better equilibrium in societies. Then leadership. The Rosetta principle, unfortunately, I had to use the Rosetta principle as one of the things, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's a principle, but I used it because that was my thought process at the time when I worked that, because it showed me the level of commitment different people across different locations will require to carry out such a thing at a time where its reality was actually in doubt. And what happened to the Rosetta probe was that the Rosetta probe, the the instrument needed to land on the meteor in a particular way to be able to transfer data. And when it landed on the meteor, it actually went askew a little, and its approach was wrong, but they were still able to gather that data. Now, what that tells me is, of course, like my Vice Chancellor said, resilience, consistency, a vision, and then to continue to make, if you fail, the next time you will fail better. Then, policy inconsistency. Prof was talking about policy inconsistency and the Chinese, you talked about policy inconsistency, and I think it's a lot of our policy inconsistency stems from, that's why I think the two things you mentioned, that the policy inconsistency as well as the idea of who should be supported into leadership positions come into play. Who should be supported into leadership positions? People who have shown some level of moral rectitude, some level of intelligence, some level of vision, and an understanding of how evolutionary progress should be. Now, if you are such a person, then there will be, the problem with policy inconsistencies will be resolved quite easily. Why? Because you are not going to come in, you are going to know that you come in on the shoulders of giants before you. And that they are there to be harnessed and not to be discarded. Whatever it is that they have done. I will expect, for example, that one of the first things a president will do will be to have a good sit down with the previous vice president, with the previous president, and have a discussion as to what his ideas and visions were. Where that is why we do handing over notes. But I think the problem with a lot of countries in Africa is because of short-term visions. People want to be called that they built a house. And unfortunately, in other parts of the country, I think constructing roads and building houses are not even KPIs for progress anymore. Then I think Professor Prince, policy somersaults, BVN, TIN, the Federal Road Safety Corps at some point came up with the number plates for Nigeria. We all paid for that. And another time they came with new number plates that just substituted the last letters beside the numbers. And we all paid for it too. And then there was an accident somewhere, and they were trying to find out who were the owners of the car that had the accident, because everybody there was dead. They couldn't find the documents inside the car, and they sent the number plates to the FRSC. And they didn't have a digitization system to track who owns the car that they themselves registered. There was a president in Brazil, I think Collor was his name, and Brazilians were surprised because for the very first time in their history, that was the first time they could see a president where you can set up a project just for skimming off state funds. And that is an everyday occurrence in Africa, unfortunately, where projects are set up for the sole purpose of funds maladministration. Of course, corruption and patronage, how do we solve that? Again, it's solved with will. There are digitization systems in Nigeria at play now. We have the BVN, like he said, But again, you look at the BVN, you look at the TIN, you look at all kinds of identificators, and kidnappers will kidnap you, use their telephone calls to make calls to ask for ransom. With all the GPS technology that we have, somebody will bring the money and do all that. So you find out that the reason you say you have failed states, you know, if you look at the social contract theory where government has a responsibility to its citizens and all that, and the citizens also say, okay, we give allegiance to our government for receipt of liberty, protection of property and life. I think a lot of states in Africa will be considered to be failed states. Not that these policies are not there, these systems are not there, but the implementation to make them efficient is lacking. Why? Because we basically eschew monitoring and evaluation systems. Then the party system. The party system, to me, again, stems from a lot of it from not just the leadership deficit, but also our orientation as people. I work as Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Ilorin. I'm constantly being pummeled by admission requests. And this happens in every university in the country. But to me, when the populace have decided as a group that the best way to address weak institutions is to try to depend on individuals for systemic, what should ordinarily be a systemic solution, then what you have will be obviously the idea that if you do something for me, I'll do something for you in return, which completely destroys the whole idea of representative democracy. There are two phases to it. The first phase is the voting phase. The moment you get into leadership positions, the electoral phase ends and the leadership phase begins. And I think that is where some of us as Africans have been lacking. I'm sorry, if you allow me to stay here, I'll talk your ears off for the rest of the day. I apologize for taking this much of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for that wonderful and enlightening presentation and your responses to the question. On behalf of the organizers, I sincerely thank everyone for participating actively in this session, and I wish you happy conferencing. I'll hand over to the Emperor to make his announcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, Tijan. 1 minute. We have a few housekeeping issues to address. I will call my ADC to do some of them. But before he does, I want to recognize the presence of the IOU Vice Chancellor in the name of Professor Makital. Professor Makital, maybe you can stand up for people to see. And he's here for a very good reason, very good news for Mr. Chairman, U6. That's a very good news for you, sir. But he will tell you later. Tijan, please, come and do your...
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamara. So we have a quick update. It is in relation to the next agenda. From here, we are going to have a tea break the usual tea break outside here. It will be led by the team of authors. But immediately after the tea break, we are going to our breakout sessions. Like the agenda that was set in, we will continue to update the agenda, but just to highlight that the breakout sessions are going to be led by these colleagues that are presented in here. You have Dr. Jainaba Sisaos. He's going to lead the session on medical and allied health sciences and pharmacy for better society. Dr. Jainaba Sisaos' email is here. You can email her your presentation together with her assistant, Keba Keita. K Keita assistant is there. You can just email it to them and they will prepare your presentations ahead of time. The other session, that session is going to take place here. So Joseph Kwek, our colleague, Dr. Benjamin Joshua, and it's going to take place at Committee Room 2. It is also a continuation on technology, the pure and applied sciences for better society. You can equally send him your presentations and he's going to work on it. So the fourth one is going to be led by Professor Victor Ikong, another colleague, and it's going to be on humanities, social sciences, education, law for better society. So the presenters under that section on the schedule can basically send to Professor Ikong and he will work ahead of time. Then the final one is going to be led by Professor Jumoke from Nigeria, and this is her email address. You can also send it to her, and her session is going to take place at Committee Room IT. There's requesting for you to help us expand the projection. You can help us expand the projection. Thank you. So that is going to be the final one, led by Professor Jumoke Ajao, and it's going to take place at Committee Room 4. That one is going to be a continuation on humanities, social sciences, education, law for better society. Yes, so just to highlight equally that those presenting virtually, in case you are in contact with any of them, we're going to have only 2 breakout rooms for virtual session. That is going to be the one led by Professor Jainaba Sisao, and another one that is going to be led by Professor Joseph Kweko at Committee Room 1, virtual presenters. So from there, we continue on to the agenda, which is to move to the university campus in Faraba. That was the highlight. But as it stands now, we are moving to have a tea break and move out to our breakout sessions. Thank you. That was it.
And Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. Can you move, please? Yeah, next slide. So the crisis of antimicrobial activities, antimicrobial resistance, coupled with the overwhelming crisis of agro-industrial waste on our environment, has actually provoked a lot of search for sustainable and also for alternative ways of coming up with ideas to address these challenges. So yes. So, okay, however, this is my outline, and you might just move, please. Like I said, the issues with antimicrobial resistance and also the overwhelming effect of the agro-industrial waste on our environment has actually provoked a lot of search among the scientists. And scientists want to come up with sustainable ways of addressing these challenges. So, among the alternatives being looked at, mango peel happened to be one of the most promising candidates, because mango peel, which is one of the most, a major byproduct of mango processing, is reported to be very rich in antimicrobial, very rich in phytochemicals, which also have antimicrobial potentials. So phytochemicals are simply secondary metabolites. These are found in plants, which helps them to stand against environmental, environmental effects such as changes in the environment, and also protect them from external stressors or attacks from pathogenic bacteria. Bacteria such as Staph aureus, such as Pseudomonas, which also affects human. So this is why this study is actually selected. You may move, please. So the objective of our study is basically to make extracts. And after making extracts, we want to look at their antimicrobial activities on some of these bacteria. So we selected Staph aureus. Staph aureus as gram-positive bacteria, which has some level of resistance. And also Pseudomonas, which is a gram-negative bacteria, which also have some level of resistance. So after doing this, we want to move ahead to fractionate, to actually know the most potent components of our crude extract, to be able to have an understanding of which actual component of our extract is having effect on these bacteria. So that will be the next step of our studies. Move, please. Next slide. So this is the method we actually employed in these studies. So both ripe and unripe mangoes were collected, because according to literatures, the state of the development of these mangoes, the environment where they are coming from, and also the varieties all have effects on the phytochemical components. So that is why we selected both ripe and unripe. So we actually chose jur from the Gambia, which is very common. And the peels were dried at 25 degrees Celsius in dark rooms. And also they were later grounded to powders. So 1 gram of each were collected and then dissolved in our solutions, different concentrations of ethanol, 5%, 60%, and 80%. And a disc diffusion assay method was used. 12 millimeter disc was used, which was soaked with 150 microliters of the extract. And plates were incubated at 30 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. Then later, the inhibition zones were measured. So our positive control was gentamicin, which was diluted to 1 in 1,000 concentration. Next slide, please. So this was our results. For the Staph aureus, the 5% basically did not show much effect, and which was just almost the dick size. And for the 60% ethanol, showed the higher effect on the inhibition zone, which measured up to 17 millimeters. And the 80% was 16 for Staph aureus and then 15 for Pseudomonas. Then the ethanols, we wanted to see whether the extraction solvents actually have effect on bacteria or not. This is just to make sure whatever is happening, whatever the inhibition is happening on the bacteria is actually our extract, not the solvent used. So all of them had no effect. Next slide, please. So these were the slides after the 24 hours for the ripe mangoes. Next slide, please. So this was the unripe one. Unripe one, we are only able to use the 60% concentration of alcohol. So, but you could see the ripe one had more effect on the bacteria compared to the unripe one, and which is inconsistent with the literatures. Next slide, please. So our findings demonstrated that ethanolic extract of mango peel exhibited considerable antimicrobial activity, antibacterial activity with the extent of inhibition depending on concentrations. For instance, the 60% had the highest concentration, which is actually in contrast with a study done in Nigeria, which reported 80% being the more potent one. In comparison to the 5% ethanolic extract, which produced only a modest inhibitory effect against both Staph aureus and then no effect on the Pseudomonas. This shows that the more potent form or components are the polar ones, because the 60% and the 80% happen to be the ones that had more inhibition zones after incubation. So our positive control had the highest activity compared to the extract, and ethanol alone had no effect, confirming the bioactivity was due to the extract. So you can see that the effect in comparison to our positive control was a bit lower. But we think if maybe the concentration of our extracts are increased, probably they might also have a comparable effect on the bacteria. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, mango peel, particularly in ripe form, extracted with 60% ethanol, exhibits significant antibacterial potential, and this may serve as a promising, sustainable natural agent in combating antimicrobial resistance. Next slide, please. So what is our future directions? Because the collection of the materials were done in the Gambia here, but we traveled to the Netherlands because they were our partners. We spent just 2 weeks there to do some of the work, so we are not able to do a lot of the things we wanted to do. The project to involve about 11 local herbs from the Gambia that are all going to be looked at, subsequently. So we want to fractionate later, and also literatures report anti-cancer effects of mango peel. For instance, mango peel was reported to downregulate the activities of prostate cancer, and also it was reported to have effect on colonic cancer. All of them, it has to do with the apoptosis, downregulation and upregulation of some of the pathways. So we want to have a look at that too, and also it's reported to have some antioxidant potentials as well. So these are some of the future directions we want to do. And then back home in the Gambia here, we have already started work. And I'm also happy to report that our project, just a few weeks ago, happened to win a national award in the Netherlands, which was actually communicated by our university. So I'm very happy to report that. Next slide. So these were some of the references we use in this study. And with that, I want to thank you all. Please, sorry, can you move? I want to show something. So these were the team I worked with. That's Barbara, which is a lead microbiologist and a professor at Rotterdam University. And that's Dr. Ahmed Manjam, who was our supervisor at the university. So this is my colleague. He's also a final medical student, and he did his study on Comparative glutinosum, which is a very famous herb in the Gambia called Jambakata. So that was his studies. So I thank you all.
That in the Gambia we have a lot of mangoes. So you investigating the mango peel, both the ripe and also the unripe one, is showing the way that definitely it can contribute towards positive health outcomes of our population. So maybe you can just jot down your questions. We will invite them at the end of the presentations. Thank you. So can we please have the next presenter? Going by the list, the impact of mentoring and life skills training on university students. Okay, not around. Then we move to number 3. You have Jumoke, right? That's the biodirectional neuroscience machine translation system for Hausa and English language for effective healthcare communication. Is she around? No. Then number 4, unlocking health behind bars, accessing HIV challenges, and envisioning preventive care for inmates in Nigeria's correctional systems by Hafsat. Okay, please come. No. I think you've already shared your PPT with him, right? Then you can come on. We project it. The name of the file, because he just submitted it now.
on slideshow. Is there? Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Standing before you is Dr. Hafsa Amin. I'm from the University of Ilorin, Department of Epidemiology and Community Medicine. I'm an associate professor of public health. My presentation is on locking frauds behind the bars, addressing HIV/AIDS challenges in Nigeria's correctional system. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Next. Okay, why this study? In 2019, the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime conducted a nationwide study in Nigeria among Nigerian prisoners, and they found an alarming evidence that twice as many prisoners have HIV prevalence than the general population, to the tune of 2.4, while they found 1.4 among the general population. And this became worrisome. They also found that even up to 25% of them had this because of injecting drug use. And worse still, there's regional variability to the extent that in the north-central Nigeria, the prevalence was actually as high as 7.1%. Surprisingly or sadly, less than 2/3 of these inmates reported access to HIV testing, harm reduction, or even satisfaction with services. Next slide, please. So it became 4 years later, another study was conducted by Amede et al., and the situation was still seemingly the same thing. They still found that there's disproportionately high rate of HIV infections among prison inmates compared to the general population. And furthermore, Salu and Akitunde found out that misconception and stigma were the fueling elements. So to address HIV in correctional settings, it's very, very essential because it forms a broader public health issue. And so, next slide. So that informs the focus of this study. I think you have jumped a slide. Can you go to the previous one? Okay, so the study objective. The study aimed to evaluate the inmates' knowledge, attitude, and preventive practices regarding HIV/AIDS in correctional centers, specifically in Gombe, northeastern states of Nigeria. And the focus areas will be in terms of their awareness, the misconceptions, and access to preventive tools, and even their perception of the available healthcare services, so that we can stem this alarming trend. And so, this focus of the study. Next slide, please look at my gesture. Next slide. No, you have jumped. No. I like to move the slides. No, you are even going further. I said you should go back. Then, okay, the next one after this. Yes, so the focus, why do we focus on this? What is the rationale? We found not only by anecdotal evidence, but by evidence-based scientific information that prisoners face high prevalence than general population, which may be due partly to the overcrowding and poor conditions in their ambience, limited access to prevention and care, lack of information, and then the neglect by the general public. And so, next slide. The next one after this, methods. It was a cross-sectional study by design conducted in Gombe State among 3 correctional centers: Bagoja Center, Gombe Center, and Tula Center. The overall sample size was 104 inmates, which were randomly selected. Used a structured questionnaire to assess their knowledge, attitude, and practices, and a descriptive and statistical analysis was deployed with a ethical approval. Findings, next slide. So with regards to knowledge, we found out that only 48.3% of them demonstrated good knowledge. And then misconceptions persist, including belief that mosquitoes do transmit HIV infection. When we look at the understanding, we also found that even less than half who correctly identify main transmission routes, they have misunderstanding regarding the adequate education on HIV. And this has a lot of public health implication, because the knowledge gap will increase their vulnerability and then perpetuate stigma, and this requires a very strong targeted HIV education. Next slide. With regards to practices, still less than half, 43.9% precisely of the inmates demonstrated good preventive practices, such as the use of condom or avoiding risky behaviors. How about access to tools? They have limited availability of condoms and poor participation in HIV education programs that hinder their preventive practices. So with regards to risk, there's continued engagement in unsafe practices, and this reflects urgent need for accessible healing resources among prison inmates. Next slide. So with regards to barriers and perception, we found out that these inmates face a lot of discrimination and poor treatment, discouraging disclosure and access to care. So the conditions in the prison is another kettle of fish. There's overcrowding, inadequate healthcare infrastructure, and all these also potentiates HIV transmission. So there is obviously an awareness gap. Most inmates had not received any structured HIV education, and this limits their ability to adopt safe practices. Next slide. So, despite without discussion with regards to the knowledge gap and misconception, we found out that though there is universal awareness of HIV among inmates, yet almost half of them still demonstrated poor knowledge and misconception. These findings align with the studies in Nigeria and in South Africa by Saliu and Akitunde 2014, Goya 2023, Amede et al. 2023. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in 2019 study reinforces this concern, reporting HIV prevalence in Nigerian prisons as 2.8, which is, as at then, twice the national prevalence. So this knowledge gap and persistent misinformation are critical drivers of these elevated rates. Next slide. Discussion slide 2, please. So, with regards to stigma, practices, and policy gaps, inmates face stigma, yes, inadequate health care, and this discourages disclosure and access to care. We can never overemphasize this. Again, the limited availability of condom, low participation in education, and risky practices such as consensual sex and injecting drug use are also key challenges worthy of note. So the United Nations on Drugs and Crime in 2019 study therefore underscore this risk, finding injecting drug use in prisons to be 25 times higher than in the community, with only 37% of inmates satisfied with health services. These realities highlight urgent need for stigma reduction, peer-led education, and improved prisoner healthcare policies. Next slide. So, we therefore recommend that one, there should be targeted education, implementing structured, peer-led HIV education to address misconception and improve knowledge among prison inmates. In area of prevention and harm reduction, we also recommend that there should be expansion of access to condom, HIV testing, and harm reduction services, addressing high-risk practices such as injecting drug use, which is 25 times higher than the community, will go a long way in stemming this tide. Now, with regards to healthcare and policy reform, we recommend that there should be improved quality and satisfaction of prison healthcare services, reduction of stigma strategies, and adoption of evidence-based policies to lower prevalence, which is double the national average. Conclusion and call to action. So why does prison health matter to the society? Of course, improving HIV and prevention care in correctional facilities protects not only the inmates, but the wider community upon their reintegration. So health equity in prisons is very, very essential for building safer and healthier societies. Next slide. We acknowledge the UTG for hosting us, the consortiums of U6 Plus, and University of Ilorin at 50, and last but not the least, Church Fund, which actually provided these travel grants and funds. These are my references. I want to thank you for your rapt attention. Do I wait for questions? Okay.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your presentation. Quite interesting. HIV prevalence of 2.8 among inmates is definitely worrying. I definitely agree with your recommendation and the conclusion that they deserve better. Because upon the release, we need to integrate them into the society. And if care is not taken, the risk of spreading the infection is very high. Thank you very much. Please take note of your question. Right? Shall I now call on to the next presenter, the one that I have by my list, a colleague of mine, Dr. Conceptual, for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon.
Okay, this next song is
My name is Dr. Haditun. I'm an associate professor in reproductive and family health nursing from the Department of Nursing, University of the Gambia. I'm happy to be here and to discuss my research topic, which is teaching and practicing nursing ethics in the Gambia. It is already a published work, and my co-authors are Associate Professor Dr. Jena Wasisao and Mr. Alassane Kante. This is my presentation outline. Next, please. Ethics are rules and principles that guide behaviors. So nursing as a profession, we have our code of ethics that guides our professionals to ensure that our activities are well regulated for the best interests of society. Nursing as a profession, we have autonomy, which goes alongside responsibility and accountability. Nursing practice should always be guided by codes and values of nursing. Next, please. So, student nurses, really they need additional guidance and support in order to be able to effectively practice the expectation of the nursing profession. Nursing ethics and values, they should be learned through modeling and supervision, because ethics and values are behaviors, and social learning theories always teach us that behaviors are learned through modeling. You see the behavior, appreciate the behavior, internalize it, and replay the behavior. So it is very important when we are teaching nursing ethics for us to be able to model it out in order for the students to be able to replicate the behavior. The Gambia developed its nursing ethics in 2014, putting into consideration the cultural values of the country, because ethics, nursing ethics try to safeguard the needs of society, and societal needs is highly influenced by their culture. Next, please. Next, please. There are 3 cadres of nursing in the Gambia, namely the registered nurses. These include nurses with higher national diploma and nurses with BSc degree. We also have the enrolled nurses and the community health nurses. But at the other side, we have a large group of nurse attendants. These are the ancillary nurses. BSc degree in nursing are provided by 2 universities, that is the University of the Gambia and 1 private university, the American International University. Postgraduate degree in nursing is only offered by the University of the Gambia. The concept of nursing ethics and values are considered in most of the introductory courses of the curricula of nursing in the Gambia, or as a single course. As in our master's program, we have a course on nursing ethics. But however, according to the ICN, which is the International Council of Nursing, it recommends that nursing ethics should be integrated throughout the nursing program, as it helps to ensure that it can be effectively inculcated to our students. Next, please. Nursing and ethics and values should be practice-based, as I've mentioned earlier, that it is a behavior which should be emulated. But unfortunately, nursing ethics and values are mostly taught by training institutions using lecture discussion methods, and commonly delivered by invited guests. Most of the time, we'll invite our councils, members, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, to come and discuss the principles of nursing and the ethics. So this limits translation of nursing ethics from theory to practice, thereby creating a big gap. Next, please. There are several recommendations from different researchers and experts in nursing that nursing ethics can be effectively taught by using different types of methods that enhance visualization. This includes problem-based learning, group teaching, role-playing, debate, case studies, and also clinical experience through mentors in the clinical areas. Developing the individual behavior should focus on modeling the behavior. And this can be done by doing, which is the practice, knowing it and being it, means internalizing the behavior so that it becomes part of the individual. Next, please. problem-based learning enhance efficacy of teaching nursing ethics and improve self-directed learning, critical thinking, communication, and ability to work as a team. And also it has been suggested that ethics can be taught through practice using group discussions and modeling. Next, please. The Code of Ethics and Values are continually revised because I've said that these are guidelines and principles that safeguard the needs of society, and society is always changing, so the ethics must change to meet the needs of society. So this call for lifelong learning in order to internalize new concepts and principles. Thus, the teaching and learning of nursing ethics and values should also be done in clinical areas where experienced senior nurses can serve as role models and mentors. However, next please. In the Gambian situation, we always find gaps as a result of the high attrition rate of nurses, including the senior nurses. So you sometimes go to the clinical areas. Most of the time, the less experienced nurses find it difficult to have role models to emulate regarding nursing ethics and values. Next, please. Talking about the practice, there are 5 elements. There are 4 elements of nursing ethics, according to the ICM, which the Gambia adapted and revised to put into consideration the moral values of the Gambians and the country as a whole. And these 4 elements include nurses and the people, nurses and practice, nurses and the nursing profession, nurses and co-workers. So I want to look at each of them and how does the practice of ethics shows in our Gambian situation. Next, please. Looking at the first element, it states that the nurse should promote an environment in which the human rights, privacy, values, custom, and spiritual beliefs of individuals and families are respected. But sometimes when you visit some of the health facilities in Gambia, you find gaps in this area. Most of the time, there is no patient consent for our routine nursing care, such as monitoring the vital signs. We think that it is routine. You can just come and say, I'm here to take your vital signs at the end. And after taking the vital signs, we don't even give feedback to our patients. Bed making, also the same thing, because we term it as it's part of our work, we must do it, but they all need consent. It is a right of the patient. Next, please. Students are also taught to maintain privacy, but when they go to the ward or the public health facilities, they sometimes face challenges to apply this concept, because sometimes screens are not available and they find themselves in dilemma. Next, please. So this is something, this picture is something that we see day in, day out, despite the fact that we talk about privacy, which is really having an impact on our practice. Next. The second one talks about how nurse deals with the nursing profession itself. That the nurse has the responsibility and accountability to maintain competency by continual learning. But as I've mentioned earlier, we have a good number of nursing aides, nurse attendants, and these people are gradually going into taking the task of trained nurses as a result of inadequate or limited number of nurses around. So you'll see that you go to the health facilities, you find them doing the job of trained nurses, which is really have an impact on the competency. Next, please. And also, if you look at access to university education, nursing education, it started in 1999, and even higher levels, including master's and postgraduate specialization came in later, as late as 2009 to even 2021, where we started our specialization, postgraduate diplomas in midwifery, pediatrics, and the like. So this has really created a delay and few opportunities for nurses to have higher degrees in nursing. And the mandatory continual education as a requirement for a nurse's license is yet to be reinforced by our council, which is really having an impact on the requirement of improving or ensuring that you continually increase or improve on your competency. Next, please. The third element talks about the nurse should assume the major role in determining and implementing the acceptable standards of nursing practice. This requires that the nurses follow the best practice guidelines to ensure quality of patient care. Yet, nursing guidelines are scarce in many of our health facilities. So this is really a gap. Next, please. The fourth element talks about how the nurse should relate with co-workers. The nurse sustain a collaborative and respectful relationship with co-workers, but should also take appropriate action to safeguard individual families, communities when their health is endangered by a co-worker or any other person. Next, please. But the societal perception of nursing in the Gambia marginalizes the nurse. In the Gambia, when we are in the health facility, if we are a female, even if you are a doctor, as long as you are in the hospital and you are in white, you are a nurse. Even if they find you in the pharmacy, you are a nurse. If you are in the lab, you are a nurse. So it's the perception, the female, any female in the health facility in white is a nurse. And we already know that the Gambia is a male-dominated society. At the level of the decision-making power and the recognition on the female nurses is something that we need to look into. And also our training institutions, the way we train our nurses, most of the time we promote complete subservience to our colleagues. It is a common saying that observe the five rights when you are giving medication, but also ensure that you give it as ordered by the doctor. So it really defeats the purpose of autonomy. If you know that it's the right patient, the right drug, the right dose, but what about if the right dose is not ordered by the doctor? And definitely that's something that we need to look into. Every profession has a culture and an identity and mode of behavior and ideology. Next, please. This ideology is engraved and forced into the minds of the students to the extent that the ideology becomes part of them, defines their behavior and mode of action. Nurses are trained to be conformists. We train them to conform to whatever they find in their nursing area, and they enter the workforce with a slave mentality, unwilling or unable to stand up to others and to their own profession. Compared to their partners, their colleagues who have been radicalized during their university days. Next, please. Nursing is a profession on its own right and should not be subjected to the control of others. As I've talked about the autonomy, nursing has its own body of knowledge and professional standard. Every nurse must do all his or her powers to defend the profession and the image of nursing. Nurse educators and practitioners and leaders should breed reformists and instead of conformists to uphold the standards of nursing. Next, please. So in conclusion, there is inadequate teaching and practice of code of ethics and values of nursing in the Gambia, and this can have an impact on the quality of care. Low status and the conformist style of teaching nurses can hinder the effective implementation of the Code of Ethics and Values among professional nurses in the Gambia. Next, please. So as a recommendation, we recommend that the nursing curricula of nursing training institutions in the Gambia should be revised in order to creatively integrate nursing ethics and values in all courses. Nursing educators should be required to develop the skills needed to teach nursing ethics and values through professional development. We use a combination of different teaching methods. It is essential that the nursing lenses of regulation to clearly define the requirements of ethics education within the nursing programs. Next, please. Senior nurses should be trained on nursing ethics and retain so that there can be mentors, collaborative training of nurse educators and clinicians on ethics. Standard guidelines should be developed. And definitely we need to revisit our style of teaching our nurses so that we can reform, we can be reformers rather than conformists, so that we can challenge the status quo, break our old barriers, set new landmarks, and uphold the standards of our profession. Next, please. These are our selected references. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you very much for listening.
For that presentation. I was one of the co-authors of this particular paper and then happened to be the chair of the session. And it's on ethics. And here I also have my PI on research ethics on methodology. So I think the right thing to do is to declare conflict of interest. And that's what I'm doing. So I think I am safe now to move. Thank you very much. So now we will have one of our medical students by the name Dejor to do her presentation. You are most welcome. Thank you.
Final access to emergency services. Good afternoon. My name is Yahya Jammeh. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Gambia. So my topic today is on access to essential emergency surgical care in the Gambia. And these are my co-authors. Some of them are around. We were supervised by Prof. Idoku. Next slide, please. So from the Gambia's population, we have like 2.6 million. But the population is still facing barriers to emergency surgical care. So some of those barriers are geographic workforce, financial infrastructure, financially and also infrastructural limitations. So in healthcare systems, Gambia have like it's divided into 3 healthcare tiers. Like you have the primary healthcare, then you have the secondary, that is like the regional level, then the tertiary, and we only have one tertiary healthcare, which is Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital. Next slide, please. So the study objective is to identify barriers to emergency surgical care in the Gambia, to explore evidence-based solutions, and situate the Gambia's challenges within a global context. So we'll align this to the universal health coverage goals. Next slide, please. So the methods we used was a literature review using PubMed and Google Scholar with the keywords emergency surgical care, healthcare access, the Gambia surgical workforce, healthcare infrastructure, financial constraints, and universal health coverage, and also health policy. Next slide, please. So we identified like 40 articles, but selected 6 due to their relevance to the topic. Then these articles were, the articles that were selected have like directly address the issue of surgical care in the Gambia and focus on key barriers like I've already stated, geographic areas, workforce shortage, and financial constraints. So the preference was given to recent studies in selecting the papers. Next slide, please. So these are some of the papers that were selected. Next, please. This is also part of the 6 papers selected. So we go to the results. So like I mentioned already, geographic and infrastructure barriers. So some papers like Omar et al., 30% of the population lives over 2 hours from hospital. This was a study done by Omar et al. In 2025, and it's covering like sub-Saharan Africa, which Gambia is part of. So unreliable electricity and water supply was a study done by Idrissa et al. It was a study done in 2011, and it's one of the studies that highlighted that we have unreliable electricity supply and also intermittent water supply. So going forward, workforce and financial barriers, you have 38.9% of surgical facilities have a surgeon. It was a study done by Gerswit et al. The same study again identified that only 16.7% have a physician anesthetist. Also, health insurance remains inadequate, affecting affordability. There was a study on the Universal Health Coverage Monitoring Forum. That was what was said there. So next, please. So the proposed solutions, you have short-term and long-term. So short-term is to strengthen referral system and also improve data collections in terms of research. So the long-term is for investment in healthcare infrastructure, expand and train the surgical workforce, and also to implement sustainable financial models. Next, please. So conclusions and recommendations. So the government commitment is essential, and to develop a national surgical plan, also strengthen governance and policy integration, to enhance public and private partnership for sustainable improvement. Next, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You saved us a lot of time, Joe. That was a good one. Accessing emergency surgical care in the Gambia is definitely a challenge. Having these results, I think, will pave the way when it comes to devising interventions, right? Thank you very much. So, since we have time, I want to accommodate one more presentation, even though it's not on our list. It's a colleague from EFSCH by the name Dr. Hadiba to kindly come forward for her presentation. Thank you. This will be the last presentation, and then we will now open the floor for questions. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Hadiba. I'm a lecturer at the University of the Gambia and also the chief scientist for Edward Francis Moore Teaching Hospital. I am a fellow in virology, medical virology. So this is my presentation title. Human papillomavirus type-specific distribution. This is a baseline study that was carried out in this country so that we'll be able to look at the effectiveness of the quadrivalent HPV vaccine in the country. Next slide, please. Disclosure, funding was received from MSD for this pilot study. Just a brief background. We all know that cervical cancer, the HPV virus, is responsible for nearly 95% of the cervical cancers. And these are caused by persistent infection with the high-risk HPV genotypes. HPV high-risk 16 and 18 accounts for 70% of cervical cancer cases. However, other high-risk types that are not HPV genotype 16 and 18 have been shown to be associated, causing nearly 15% of cervical cancer in Africa, Asia, and globally. The burden of cervical cancer is mostly recorded in less developed countries, and this is due to limited access to early screening and detection and management of precancerous lesions, inadequate treatment due to financial constraints. The human papillomavirus, the high-risk type, does not only cause cervical cancer, but it can also cause penile cancer, anal cancer, throat cancer, and vaginal and vulvar cancer. However, because 90% of cases are detected in cervical cancer, the focus is more on cervical cancer. Next, please. There are different types of vaccine to protect our young girls aged between 9 and 13 against cervical cancer. And these vaccines, the first one that was developed was the bivalent vaccine, and it was only for type 16 and 18. Later on, the quadrivalent Gardasil 4 was developed, and this targets the high-risk HPV 16 and 18, and also two low-risk types, which is HPV 6 and 11. HPV 6 and 11, they are called low-risk type because they don't cause cervical cancer or cancer, any of those cancers that I've mentioned, but they call what we call genital warts, and genital warts are treatable, though they are very annoying. The monovalent vaccine is the last one that was developed, and it targets 9 of the high-risk types. And these are 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58, including the high-risk type 16 and 18, including as well the low-risk type 6 and 11. Now, WHO target for elimination of the human papillomavirus for 2030 says that 90% of girls fully vaccinated with the HPV vaccine by age 15, and by 2030, 70% of the women must be screened with a high-performance test, such as the HPV DNA, by 35 and again by 45 days. And by 2030, 90% of women identified with cervical precancer receive adequate treatment and care. So this is the road towards 2030 for cervical cancer elimination. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly give a brief country profile. Cervical cancer is the leading cause of cancer deaths in Gambian women. The current estimate shows that in 2023, 325 new cervical cancer cases were reported. And this gives us a 39.4 per 100,000 women. That's the age standardized incidence. And of the 325 new cases, 62.8% died from the disease. That's quite a lot. And this results in a mortality rate of 24.4 per 100,000 women. And this was 2023. Next slide, please. So, what is our HPV vaccination situation in the Gambia? In 2024, the vaccine was introduced. A demonstration was done in one of the local areas in the western region, and girls 9 to 13 were vaccinated. In 2029, the vaccine was incorporated into the country's EPI routine program and rolled out to all health facilities. Multiple A cohort now is being conducted since 2019 in the country. in the demo area and also in the non-demo areas.
Now I want us to join.
The national coverage was very good. In 2019, we got 83%. However, we had a very poor outcome for the second dose, which was in 2021. We got only 34%, and this was due to COVID-19. Next, please. So, what was the study aim? So this, because we know that initially I've conducted a study to look at the HPV prevalence in the country, and a baseline was done. However, this study was done only within the Greater Banjul area, and we found that 13% of the human papilloma, the prevalence rate is 13% for human papillomavirus prevalence. And a similar study was done in the rural area by Waltz et al., and they found also 12% prevalence rate in the rural area. So because there are no studies on HPV genotype distribution in the formalin fixed paraffin embedded biopsy cervical cancer tissue, we decided to look at this to know which of the HPV genotypes are causing cervical cancer in the country. So the primary objective of the study was to retrospectively assess the prevalence of HPV in FFPE, to determine if there was any difference in the distribution of high-risk HPV genotypes in cervical cancer in Gambia, comparison with the global distribution. So the study was carried out in Edward Francis Montgomery Hospital at the Department of Histopathology, and it was a retrospective cross-sectional design. So these were the inclusion and exclusion criteria. All FFPE that are attached to the cassette properly stored and all the relevant clinical data were selected for processing. The H&E stain slides of these paraffin blocks were examined for cancerous tissues and verified by the pathologist. The exclusion criteria all archive atypical squamous cells of undesirable significance, SIN1 and SIN2, inadequate disease material, and those clinical details were removed. The Edward France, for those of you who are not from the country, Edward France is the only tertiary referral hospital for patients or specimens for any form of suspected cancer in the Gambia, and is situated in Banjul, the capital city. The Department of Pathology, they maintain a register where all received and processed tissue samples are recorded. And from this register, the FFPE samples of women are diagnosed with high-grade precursor lesions, carcinoma in situ, cervical cancer, whether it is squamous, adenocarcinoma, or any form, were retrieved from January 2013 to December 2022. 338 samples were retrieved. Mean age of women was 50 years old, and 326 were diagnosed with cervical cancer. 300 of these were squamous cell carcinoma, 4.3 adenocarcinoma, 3.4 carcinoma in situ, and we had only SIN3 with a high degree of invasive suspicious of invasive carcinoma. Next slide. H&E stain slides of these paraffin blocks were examined for cancerous tissues, and these were verified by the pathologist. And tissue sectioning was carried out on samples that were adequate, and 60 micron of tissue samples were sectioned from each paraffin block. Next slide. So we do HPV DNA screening using Attila Biosystems LabLine 9200 system. And the Amphire HPV-16 detects HPV-16 and 18 simultaneously, and then group the rest of the high risk together as other high risk. Next slide. So this was the design, the flow, the workflow, and we first did look at the housekeeping gene, which is the internal beta globin gene that we amplify. So samples that have adequate internal beta hemoglobin gene were further, they were valid to go on with the next stage processing, which is the HPV screening. Those that have inadequate beta hemoglobin internal housekeeping gene were removed. And we end up having 119 samples, and we have 104 HPV positives and HPV negative 15. Next slide. The statistical analysis was done. We used SPSS version 21.0, and analysis was primarily descriptive with proportion of each HPV type, and we look at the significance of the primary outcome of interest at a p-value of less than 0.05 or equal to 0.05 and 95 confidence interval. Next slide. So results. So looking at the age here, is it work here? No, okay. Go back, please. Women between the ages of 32 years and 64, HPV prevalence was mostly found in this group of women. And if you look at this group of women, they are young women with young families, and they contribute in the society as well. Then the HPV type that was more prevalent was HPV-16. HPV-16 together with HPV-18 combined gives us 69.2%, which is not very far from the global distribution of HPV-16 and 18 causing cervical cancer. But the interesting thing for this study is the other high-risk types were found to be 17.3, even more than the HPV-18. Next slide, please. So looking at the different genotype in the distribution in the different cervical cancer type, when we look at the squamous cell carcinoma, HPV-16 was found in 53 of them, because we had 97 positive, and this was 54.6. But also in squamous cell carcinoma cancer cases, other high-risk HPV type were found to be even more than the HPV type 18, so 18.5. Next slide. We look at also the regions where these cases are coming from. But what is interesting is majority of the cases are coming from the West Coast region and the Carnifing Municipal Council. But we see less cases from Banjul and the far end of the country, the CRR, URR, and LRR. Next slide. So we also look at the ethnicity, looking at the women with cervical cancer, and those who are also positive for HPV, high-risk types. Mandinka came up the top, and followed by Jola and Fuller. However, the previous study that we did looking at the circulating HPV genotype, the circulating genotype was mostly found in the Fuller community. Next, please. So we'll also look at the association between age, HPV genotype, and cervical cancer. and we found that HPV-16 was significantly associated with cervical cancer. Next slide, in the case of time. Next slide. So, the high HPV prevalence rate was found to be 87.4% in cervical cancers, and this is similar to other studies conducted in the neighboring countries like Senegal and Nigeria. Senegal got 90%, Nigeria 90.7%, and the Gambian study we had 87.4%. So the combined prevalence rate of 69.2 from this study is no different from the global study that says that 70% of cervical cancer are caused by HPV type 16 and 18 combined. Because type 16 and 18, they're the most prevalent and most potent carcinogenic viruses, and their probability of disease progression and persistence is significantly higher than other high-risk HPV types. Therefore, this is why the focus is more on HPV 16 and 18. Next slide. What we observe in the study is the high prevalence rate of HPV 17, or the other high-risk HPV type that the quadrivalent vaccine that we are using in the country does not cover. So this shows that the quadrivalent vaccine that targets the high-risk type 16 and 18 can only prevent our girls from getting HPV 16 and 18, but cannot prevent them from contacting other high-risk HPV types that can also cause cervical cancer. Because this study shows that other high-risk types are causing cervical cancer in our country. So this study agrees with a study that I've done in 2018 that found that other high-risk types in cervical samples of HIV-positive women that were diagnosed with cervical cancer in the Gambia. Like I said, our quadrivalent vaccine that we are using does not confer protection against these other high-risk types. Next, please. An interesting finding, I've mentioned that we see cases more from West Coast region and KMC than from the other region like North Bank, Central, or Lower River region. This shows that it's either women go to, when they have these cases, they are managed at the local level than being referred to Banjul, because Banjul is very far from this region. The differences could be attributed to several factors, which includes access, proximity of the only histopathology department in the country. Now, in the case of Banjul, we saw only a very low, which is 3% cases. This could also be due to, because Banjul, those residing in Banjul, they have access to the teaching hospital where the histopathology lab is, where we have gynecologists, and so therefore they can have access cervical cancer screening and timely pre-cancer management, because that's the only hospital that they are doing HPV DNA screening. So this highlights the need to decentralize cervical cancer screening in the country for easy access and management of precancerous lesion and prompt treatment option. In conclusion, the study shows that the overall frequencies of HPV genotypes detected in women with cervical cancer was high. HPV 16, other high-risk HPV and HPV 18 genotypes were responsible for causing cervical cancer in the Gambia. And there is no difference between the global distribution of HPV 16 and 18 genotypes in this study. However, the other high-risk HPV genotypes reported in the study showed that the country will benefit more from the nanovalent vaccine than using the Gardasil 9. Next, please. I think that's the last one. Oh, the study limitation. We have some limitation, and this is failure to amplify the internal human beta globin gene in a high number of the FFPE samples. This could be attributed to the long storage of the samples. Some studies have also elucidated the same thing difficulties in trying to extract DNA from long storage FFPE. Another limitation encountered is the study was the poorly embedded tissues not attached to the cassette or had little embedded tissues, which made tissue sectioning impossible. Acknowledgement. The Edward Francis Management, MSD for the funding, my co-authors, Associate Professor Dr. H. Tiba, Dr. Lee, Fode, Ahmad Tijan Savage, and my collaborator at the University of Westminster, Dr. Patrick T. Kimmit, and the Department of Laboratory Medicine staff, and also the research staff. So this was published last year. Thank you. No, that's mine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hadi, for that wonderful presentation. Cervical cancer is a problem in the Gambia due to late presentation and then also low awareness. Thank you very much. So may I please have the presenters? I will now open the floor for questioning, comments. We have 5 presenters so far. Can we please have the mic? Sertijan? Yes. Any question? 1, Prof. Ogun. Yes, 2, Dr. Danso. Okay, 3 from Fatmata, and then 4, right? So, Prof, the floor is yours. Thank you. It's loud enough.
What are reasonable, because you're a medical student, you are finishing in a few, you're finishing within the next 1 year. What are the, when you talk about financial inclusion, it's too broad. You have to, what did you find from your literature that serves that in Africa for financial inclusion? Because I'm a pathologist, I practice pathology in this country, and based on, for example, the study that was just presented, you know the challenges. So what are these financial inclusions? Because the current national health insurance scheme that is being purported in the Gambia does not fit into the proper insurance scheme. So what you found from literature, we need to know. Then to Dr. Ba, I thank you for your for your study. I just want to lay the emphasis that there is a comparative advantage if somebody takes vaccination for HPV 16 and 18 or the quadrivalent vaccine, that it sort of protects somehow for the other high-risk HPV. So while we are trying to get the non-valent vaccine, I think the other vaccinations can still subserve relatively, and they are protected, and that's key. So that's another thing I think we need to bear in mind. For the HIV, I don't know whether, the question I would ask, you said HIV is very high among prisoners. From my own experience, I know a lot of prisoners tend to have a high population of men that have sex with men. So did you find that percentage? What percentage did you find in your study? Or did you investigate along that line to see why HIV infection is very high among prisoners in your study? And to Dr. Ba, the question is that, my question is that there's something called task shift. Did you try and investigate the issue of task shifting when you talk about nursing assistants? And because if you look at the Gambia, I've been here for 5 years now, and I know the challenges of human resource capacity. And in many African countries, we do what is called task shifting. Is that a systemic, is that an intentional way of doing things here in the Gambia? Thank you very much.
Do we want to take all the questions and then later? Or do you want to address them now, one after the other? Oh, before you forget, okay, please go ahead. The floor is yours. I think the first question was addressed to who, provided I was, huh? There you go. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for the question. So from the literature review, what I found out was the study done by Fenny et al., a comparative analysis between 5 African countries, that social health insurance scheme was introduced, but it's not sufficient enough to achieve universal health coverage. So what they advocate for is to do a hybrid financial model that is combining general taxation with targeted subsidies to improve financial protection across Africa.
Yes, exactly. I also found that there was a gap in the results. Yeah, but then it was an undergraduate study, and they also did a literature review. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Our study was premised on the findings of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime that was conducted in 2019 alongside the Federal Ministry of Health and the Nigerian Prison Service. In their findings, they found out about consensual sex, the prevalence being 76% and 28% respectively among men and women reporting such. They also found out about the issue of injecting drug use, and they found a quite alarming percentage. They didn't report the aspects of men sleeping with men, even though we know it exists. And so, because of this high prevalence of misconception about the route of transmission and non-availability of tools to prevent this further spread, that was why we conducted this study. We may have to now look forward to having a longitudinal study that will assess such in very time and in not too long a distant time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Doc?
Thank you very much, sir, for that important question. I recognize the fact that the Gambia is a developing country where there are a lot of gaps, including gaps in human resources. Sometimes there can be need for tax safety, but in nursing, that is what we call autonomy and safeguarding the interests of the community. So despite the fact that we have inadequacies, doesn't mean that we should put the risk of the life of our community, put the life of our community at risk. So if we are shifting any task, it should be at the level of the training of the individual, especially the untrained nurses. Sometimes, you see tasks that have been shifted to the untrained nurses, and it is higher than the level that they were trained. That can pose risk to the patients that they are caring for. And also, when you are shifting tasks as a trained nurse to an untrained nurse, you retain the autonomy. There should be what we call supervision. You supervise the individual. But many a time, because of inadequacy of the trained nurses, you'll see that there is that gap in the supervision, which really can have an impact on the quality of care. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof, for that contribution. Is not a question, but a contribution. Yes, I do recognize the fact that the quadrivalent vaccine can do a cross protection of other high-risk type. However, as the literature is shifting and most countries having more research findings on this cross protection and for how long. So those countries that have been using the bivalent vaccine, when the literature's shifted, they changed to quadrivalent vaccine. And now the literature has shifted. Now all of them nearly, they're changing to the nanovalent vaccine. And the earlier the country as a whole do that, the better for us. Because at the end of the day, the cross protection is against HPV genotype 35 and genotype 45, and that's not enough. So if the other high-risk types are being seen causing cervical cancer in the country, I think the country needs to level up, change to nanovalent vaccine. Because at the end of the day, Gavi is giving us the vaccine and the country is just giving covering 20% of the whole vaccine finances. So I think the earlier the better, so that we can protect our girls from cervical cancer in the next 35 to 40 years to come. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for those answers. I was told that we should end this session by 2, and then we have few more presenters online. So I may want to invite 1 or 2 questions more, then we move to the online sessions. I also have one for our prof from Nigeria, Jumeke, but then I will reserve that and then see whether it is possible. Yeah, but then I will also want to invite Dr. Danso. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for all the presenters. My question is to the presenter who made the presentation on HIV in correctional centers in Nigeria. I want to know how the ethical issues were handled or approved, and whether the patient or the prisoners or inmates actually were the ones who were consented, or their family signed the consent form, or whether it is the Ministry of Interior with the prison authorities. Yes, so second question for that presentation is whether the inmates are screened before they be admitted into the correctional centers. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those questions. If you can recall, I told you the study to find out the prevalence was actually carried out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, in addition with the Federal Ministry of Health of Nigeria, as well as the Nigerian Prison Services in 2019. They were the ones that screened them to find out the prevalence. We were amazed at the fact that there are certain risk factors that still kept on perpetuating the fact that they are not aware of the means of transmission. They have several misconceptions that people can have HIV through mosquito bites. They do not have access to tools that enable them to do proper preventive measures. They don't even have access to information, and that was why we set out for this study. Of course, we took ethical approval from the Ministry of Health of Gombe State, and this we also took their individual ethical approval by requesting for their consents, written informed consents, as well as the consent from those people at the correctional centers. We were told, from part of the questions we asked, it was obvious that there was no screening prior to admitting them into those correctional centers. I hope I've been able to answer the 2 questions. Or is it partly? Hello? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I am also coordinating those ones online at the same time. That's why I was not able to concentrate on the questions and also the answers for that one. But I hope it was answered, was it? Otherwise, then we move to the next, the last one for the matter, so that we can entertain the online presenters. Thank you. Fatmata. Hello. Good afternoon, good morning. Any presenter online?
Thank you to all the presenters for the wonderful presentation. I have 3 questions, but one is already asked by Dr. Danso, so I would forgo that. My first question goes to Mr. Davo. I really enjoy the insightful work, and I'm anticipating to read it because it's very much in line with what I do. So, but I noticed the study used a specific mango variety for the peel extraction. So I would like you to clarify the results you presented are intended not broadly for all the mango varieties across the country, or are they, the results presented, are they specific to just mango variety that you use, which is the Jude variety in the Gambia?
Mike, please.
My second question goes to Dr. Ba. Dr. Hadiba, on the HPV presentation, thank you so much for the insightful work that you guys are doing at Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital. I was curious about the ethical protocol followed, specifically where the participants informed and did they provide consent for their samples to be used in the study? And if so, please kindly help elaborate how this process was obtained and documented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatmata, for those very important questions. Abu Bakar, you want to say something?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question. Like that's why when I was presenting, I made mention of literature's reporting that based on the origin of the mango, the variety, and also the state of the mango, the phytochemicals found in them are different. Like they have impact on them. So the jewel we collected can also stand for the jewel variety in the Gambia, and this might not in fact apply to all the jewel varieties because this came, it was actually collected from Gunjur, so this might actually be different from maybe another mango variety that is collected maybe in the up countries. Yes, so it might not represent all other mango varieties and also not all the jewel varieties. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Abu Bakar. Dr. Hadi?
Thank you very much. Is it Fatmata? Thank you very much for that question. Yes, we did obtain ethics clearance from the Edward Francis Mould Ethics Committee. We also had an ethics clearance from the Gambia government MRC Joint Ethics Clearance. These FFPE samples, stored samples, and when patients have their samples taken for biopsy, they're normally stored for 10 years and after they are discarded. And these patients are always asked if they give their consent for further work to be done on the samples. And that's the norm that we do at the histology department. When we receive samples, we always have that form that is attached to it. Yes, all the process was duly followed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fatmata, for that question. She's one of the postgraduate students in research ethics and methodology. And I know why she's asking that particular question, because of the informed consenting, right? We have different types of informed consenting. That's good. I would now want to appreciate the presenters for a very good presentation. Even though I will reserve mine, we will have a side discussions later, yeah, for the sake of time. So I want to appreciate the presenters for those brilliant presentation let's kindly please appreciate them as they take their seats. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we now move to the online presenters. Hello, IT, over there. They are online. Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Do we have the presenter on climate change online? Hello, online presenters? Hello, online presenters? Okay. But I just want to find out how many
online. Yeah? I've muted. Yes, yes. Maybe because of the mic. Yeah, but I've muted. In the we can do share this game, but we can not refuse the game. But if you want you use names and does not use. Names does not use. So after his mic is because of the mic. Not out. Not out.
Riverine ecosystem health and then potentials for sustainable restoration. A class of river, is it a river caninin from Kenya by Charity. Hello, Charity. Hello, Charity. Oh, no response. Charity is around.
Hello.
Yeah, the floor is yours. You may start. You may start, please.
Good morning, good evening. Are you able to see my slides?
Not yet.
Are my slides visible?
No, they are not.
Okay, my name is Charity Barasa. I'm a student at the University of Eldoret. I'm going to present to us my title on riverine ecosystem health and
Charity, if you are speaking, you are muted. We can't get you. Hello, Charity, please share your PPT and then open a separate window for the PPT again, and then you will be reading from the one that you have shared, or you will read from the one that you have opened from another window. Are you getting me? She's not online.
Madam Coordinator, the student had shared the slides with Professor Kyoko. I thought you could assist from your side for sharing if she has a challenge.